For now, we turn to a controversial murder case dating back more than 40 years, notable to most because of its connection to the Kennedy family. Ethel Skakel Kennedy's nephew, to be precise. It was 1975 when 15-year-old Martha Moxley was brutally beaten to death with a golf club. Her body was found in the backyard of her home in Greenwich, Connecticut, the morning after she had attended a Halloween party at the home of the Skakel family who lived across the street. The case went unsolved for years. Then, 17-year-old Thomas Skakel was last to be seen with her and was at one time a prime suspect, but it was Thomas's younger brother Michael who was ultimately charged with and convicted of Moxley's murder in 2002, a quarter of a century after the murder, after two former students at a treatment center for troubled kids testified they'd heard Michael confess, and prosecutors played the jury a portion of a tape which gave the impression he was confessing, though the defense says he was not. The Skakel family fought the conviction for years, arguing he should have been tried in juvenile court, that the statute of limitations was up, and that prosecutorial misconduct played a role in the jury's decision. In 2013, Skakel was granted a new trial and released from prison after 11 years behind bars when a judge determined his trial lawyer failed to adequately represent him. The state's highest court will soon determine if he's to be tried again or the conviction reinstated. But in a new book, his cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., says he's found the real killers. The book is called Framed: Why Michael Skakel Spent Over a Decade in Prison for a Murder He Didn't Commit. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. joins me now. Robert, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. And that actually was the best summation of that case that I've seen to date.
Let's see what you think in 8 minutes. Correct me if I'm wrong, no physical evidence, no eyewitnesses, correct?
Right. There was no blood, no fingerprints, no other physical evidence. The only way that the prosecution could convict Michael Skakel was by a confession. He had never made a confession, but as I show in the book, the two confessions that the prosecution produced were both suborned by a crooked police detective named Frank Carr, for whom this was a career case.
Including the confessions that those two young men or boys, when he was at this reform school, for lack of a better expression.
One of those confessions, the witness was dead by the time the case was tried, so they used an actor to play him, and there was no effective cross-examination as a result.
But pretty shocking fact, you rely on one guy, this guy Thomas Bryant, who's a relative of Kobe's, a cousin or something, who said to you a long, long time after this happened that he actually accompanied two young men from New York who he contends were the real killers, and so do you. That's factually accurate, correct?
That's correct.
Why should he be believed? Where was he for a quarter of a century if he thought he had these killers? He knew who the killers were of this young woman.
Tony Bryant was a classmate of Michael Skakel's for 2 years, and then in 1975 he returned to New York City. He came from a very prominent African-American family. His mother was an Oscar-winning film producer. His brother also played for the Mavericks. His cousin is Kobe Bryant, played for the Lakers. He went to public school in New York City, but was bringing these two boys up to Greenwich on many occasions to meet his friends, his old friends in Greenwich. They met Martha Moxley. One of them became obsessed with her. They brought him. Tony brought them up there 6 separate occasions. On a Halloween Eve in 1975, he brought them back. They plotted the murder or the sexual assault on the train on the way up. At 8:45 that evening, they picked up golf clubs from the Skakel lawn and made it clear they were going to kill somebody. And Tony left. 20 minutes later, they committed the murder. They confessed to Tony on many occasions, beginning the following Monday. Another boy who helped them clean off that night, and a boy named Jeffrey Byrne, an 11-year-old boy, in whose house they stayed that night, also related what happened to Tony.
Why didn't Bryant say anything for a quarter of a century?
Well, Tony told his mother, and his mother told him, "You're a black kid. Greenwich has a notoriously racist police department. You brought the killers up there. You yourself testified that you had, or recounted that you had a golf club in your hand at the murder scene 20 minutes before the girl was murdered. If you come forward, it's highly likely you'll be implicated and maybe charged and go to jail."
But why should we believe him, Robert? I mean, if it turns out he waited so long, there is no independent corroboration of their presence in Greenwich. Is that correct?
That's not correct. I, in fact, talked to both of the killers, and I tape recorded the conversations. They admitted that they were in Greenwich. They admitted they were in Greenwich that night. They admitted that they accompanied Tony to Greenwich on many, many occasions. They admitted that they spent the night in the home of Jeffrey Byrne. They later changed that story, and both of them came back and said that they had checked their diaries from 28 years before, and that, as it turns out, they hadn't been in Greenwich that night, but in previous conversations, they admitted to being in Greenwich. They knew all of the characters who were, close to the Skakels and to Martha Moxley at that time. And then I found, as I detail in the book, mountains of corroborative evidence to support Tony Bryant's story, including the fact that 2 hairs found on Martha Moxley's body. One of them was African-American, and Adolph Hasbrook, one of these men, is African-American, and that has never been explained. Nobody's been able to offer any kind of rational explanation about how that could have happened. The other, according to the FBI crime lab, had Asian characteristics, and Burton Tinsley, the other killer, has apparently some Asian or American Indian blood.
You named him in the book, you're naming him here. It's clear you're hoping to draw them out. Is it? I mean, I've heard you say in other interviews you hope they sue you so you can depose them. I mean, is that part of the goal?
If they're innocent, they will sue me. But they've taken the fifth, and the state of Connecticut, if it really believed Michael Skakel was guilty and these boys weren't, it would offer them immunity and compel them to testify.
You were a former prosecutor, so you're not an anti-law enforcement guy. What is this about? Ineptitude, corruption? What happened here?
Well, it was as I show in the book, there were 5 people who were involved in framing Michael Skakel. One was a corrupt police detective. There were many police involved with the investigation. Some of them were inept, some of them were competent. The problem with the Greenwich police is there were 147 men on the force, and not one of them had ever been involved in a murder investigation. So they made a lot of mistakes. They lost the murder weapon, the golf club handle that was found with Martha's body. They lost many, many hairs that were found on her body. They lost a lot of other really critical forensic evidence that could have exculpated Michael or inculpated the real killers.
You spent a lot of time in your life on this. There are a lot of people who have been wrongly convicted. You obviously think your cousin is one of them. Is in part this a result of guilt? I mean, you have said, a lot of people have said who are on Michael Skakel's side, had it not been Kennedy cousin Michael Skakel, he probably wouldn't have been charged, likely wouldn't have been convicted, and wouldn't have spent 11 years in jail. Is that part of the motivation here?
My reason is really straightforward. I knew that he was innocent. I knew from the beginning. I knew Michael Skakel really well. I was estranged from him for really the last 10 years. But I knew him very well, and I always knew, even when he was angry at me, that he was innocent. And it's like, if you see somebody getting mugged, and you're the only one there who's watching it, do you put your head down and keep going, or do you try to help out? You're right about the fact that he would not have been convicted if Mark Furman, the disgraced LA police detective
OJ fame,
from OJ, if he had not been able to brand Michael for his own purposes as a Kennedy cousin. Michael Skakel doesn't have a drop of Kennedy blood. I never knew Michael Skakel until 8 years after the crime was committed. I never heard of the Martha Moxley.
The Skakels are Republicans.
Right, and there's a whole chapter in this book about the Skakel family history and the Kennedy family history. We were estranged. They were never part of our lives. They supported Richard Nixon in 1960 against they were oil and
somebody against your father for the Senate. But we only have a minute left here. The highest court in Connecticut is deciding whether to retry your cousin or to reinstate the conviction. We have the appellate lawyer in the case saying it's the older brother who did it, Thomas. You say in your book that John Moxley, the brother of Martha, there's enough evidence to indict him. Then you have these... Yeah?
No.
What do you say?
No, I don't believe John Moxley committed the crime, and I don't believe Kenny Littleton, but part of this story is outlining the evidence against the 5 original suspects.
But is the goal to throw...
all of whom had much more evidence against them than Michael Skakel.
Is the goal to throw as much up against the wall so that there is enough doubt in the minds of the judges so that they decide...
Absolutely not. The goal is to tell the truth about this case for the first time, and I don't believe... any of those people had anything to do with it. I think the killers are who I say the killers are: Adolf Hasbrouck, Burton Tinsley, and I'm not throwing stuff against the wall. I have the evidence not only to persuade a reader that they did it, but also to persuade a jury.
Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Good to see you. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The book, again, is Framed: Why Michael Skakel Spent Over a Decade in Prison for a Murder He Didn't Commit.